we kind of did a productive struggle year one, gathered a ton of rookie picks for year two, and we're currently in that rookie draft. Shawn, you've been talking for so long about how much fun this rookie draft would be. We've been having quite a bit of fun with it. You've been doing a lot of work, manning the phone, sending out trade offers. I'm excited to talk through our process and what we've managed to get out of all these picks so far.
It's been a crazy amount of fun. I've been looking forward to this ever since we did the original draft last season and moved down a bunch and stockpiled picks. And if anything, sometimes the anticipation can be better than the reality. But then if anything, I feel like the reality has been better than the anticipation on this. We've got to make a lot of picks. We've made, I believe, 8 trades, which, we're just kind of mid-third. So that gives you a sense of how much we were able to move around. One of the things that we talked about originally and has been part of this sort of perpetual reloading idea is that if you have a lot of picks, that it gives you both a lot of flexibility and a lot of control over the board as the draft actually takes place. So when you are on the clock in a spot that you like, you can go ahead and make the pick. If you're on the clock in a spot where you have 2 guys even, especially in the first round, you can move back a spot and pick up some value. If you have 4 or 5 picks together in the late second, early third, you can pick and choose among the players that you have labeled as targets. And then when that pushes somebody down you don't have as a target, you can trade back to someone who wants to come up and get that player because he's now an ADP value. As you do that, it allows you to then move a lot of value into the future as well. So one of the things that we'll talk about is where we are now for next year's draft at this point. But Ben, let's start out from the beginning. We're going through the draft. Obviously, we're excited about the players going off here. The listeners are excited about exactly how things are transpiring. So let's start to take them through the first round. Look at who went. No surprise, I don't think, that Breece Hall goes number 1. Where do we go from there?
Well, Treylon Burks went second, and we started the first round with picks 3, 4, 7, and 12. And little spoiler, we only made one of those picks, but we still made 3 first-round picks. So Shawn made several trades. I'm going to give you all the credit for it because I'm not – we talked through all of this, but you are the wizard at coming up with trade offers and packages. We did pick at 3. We moved back from 4 to 5. We moved back from 5 to 6. We also picked at 6. Then we moved back from 7 to 8. Then we traded out from 8 all the way out of the first round. And then we traded back in to 9. So we had quite the eventful first round in terms of moving around the board. Like you said, when you have those 4 picks, it gives you so much flexibility. Oftentimes people want to come up a little bit. I thought it was really interesting, sort of in our conversation, some of the strategies that you were thinking through about just these small move backs that we did several times. Our first, I guess the first move or decision point was 103, and we were ready to take Drake London there. So we did with Burks off the board. I think we both like Burks more than London. A lot of people have London over Burks. The way I see it is that's a top 3, a tier of 3, Hall and Burks and London. At 4, we were kind of a little indifferent, so we moved back to 5 and picked up Rashad Penny to do that. At 5, we moved back to 6. We picked up our boy Benjamin and also a whole round move up from 602 to 502. So that was just something that will maybe help us down the line. And Benjamin, we were just joking before the show, not even likely to make our roster when we get to the regular season cutdowns, but he's on the roster now, and we're excited to have him. We do have James Conner, so if something were to happen to James Conner, we got some insurance. We can tell ourselves that was a smart move. Then at 106, at 4 and 5, Kenneth Walker and Jamison Williams went off. And Shawn, we talked a little bit about that Garrett Wilson, Jamison Williams decision. That was part of the reason we moved from 4 to 5. We liked those guys very similarly. And then again, after Walker went 104 from 5 to 6. But we were almost hoping that we'd get Williams at 6, right?
We were, and for having so many picks and picks in the right spot, we did have some mild compromises here because, like you said, we were kind of hoping that Treylon Burks would fall in the RotoViz ADP Dynasty ADP tool. You can pull up RotoViz TriFlex specifically. I know that a lot of listeners aren't playing that format exactly, but it's so representative of the types of leagues that everyone is building now. And so I think that part of it is pretty cool. The ADPs for these guys, Kenneth Walker, a 3.1 average, London 3.2, Burks 3.9. And so from that perspective, I mean, Burks had a good chance of coming to us at the 103, but he did not. We did want a receiver. We do like Kenneth Walker, and running back is our biggest weakness. But at the same time, we were very willing to make that move back and pick up Penny. Ben, I mean, you're obviously our Seahawks watcher, and it does seem like Walker has this extreme advantage right from the get-go in terms of how it's going to work. But if you talk about moving back one spot, and especially if we're trying to put together some running back points in year one or this coming year in 2022, maybe those guys are a little bit closer together, and that gives us a fourth running back. So our guys that we were really emphasizing here, as we really do try and win a title this year, if we don't win the title, or at least get a bye, make the semis, try and get into that championship game, it'll be disappointment. I mean, that kind of thing does happen. Injuries happen. You have a bad luck loss in the playoffs. That kind of thing happens. And if we don't get into that position, we'll be pretty disappointed. We have Saquon Barkley, James Conner, both of those guys going early in redraft. So that would suggest that the community thinks we've got a good shot there. Then Rojo, which obviously we're irrationally exuberant about. You put Penny in there, and that part, I think, from a redraft perspective, and when you're looking at running backs in Dynasty, except for your foundation piece, it really is sort of just this redraft approach, like having him. So we moved down from 4 to 5, and then like you mentioned, we moved down again because we were kind of targeting Jameson Williams. We had them very close together in the RotoViz rookie guide. The one member of our team who was very adamant that Wilson is the better pick was Travis May, and he's the person who is the most immersed in college football. And so from that perspective, I mean, there's some reason to believe that we maybe got the right guy. Wilson does go a little bit earlier on average, but those guys are close. And I have seen Williams go as early as the 103. I mean, he's the person that people think when he's healthy, maybe that's the massive win. So we were kind of hoping to go for the massive win. You end up there with the Jets, and it's maybe a little bit more of a compromise, but Wilson still seems like a high floor, even if it doesn't happen in 2022. I mean, the Jets are going to get this figured out while he's there. Well, we say that, but the Commanders and the Panthers are still in the process of trying to do this over the course of many years. So no guarantees, but we do take Wilson. And I mean, we're balancing our exposure to those two guys across multiple leagues. I would have loved to have Williams in this one that I'm in with you, but I mean, a pretty good chance that this works out very nicely for us anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think you and I are both getting a lot of Burks. I have Williams in 2 other places now. These are the only places now that I have drafted London or Wilson. So I'm kind of glad in that respect to have them on a team. But it is funny because I think both of us on our other teams are targeting these guys pretty heavily, Burks and Williams. And so I have Burks in multiple other spots as well. And so it's I've gotten pretty good exposure to this group. But it's pretty interesting that on our team together, we'll be on London and Wilson. I don't know. I kind of like it because we have a lot of sort of our guys on this team already. So to have like sort of our guys, but not quite exactly our guys, is not like the end of the world. You like a little mix. We do have Elijah Moore on this roster as well, which was one other reason that it was sort of a mild compromise and we were targeting Jameson Williams a little bit more was, I mean, we're already kind of invested in the Jets passing game. So we're in a spot where their values maybe their really bad outcomes might be correlated, which would be like if Zach Wilson's really poor and the Jets are just really poor, it could be kind of bad for both of their value. And so that's maybe not a great thing to have tied together, but not the end of the world by any means. And something that certainly we're happy to leave with, this early part of the draft with London and Wilson. We could have stayed put at 3 and 4 and taken them. We also add Penny. We add the move up late. We add our guy, Benjamin. And then we were on the clock at 7 and didn't really want to take Olave there. I don't think there's any real secret. The guy that we actually would have wanted to take, which was Sky Moore. We moved back from 7 to 8 for Gerald Everett, your favorite tight end for the last 5 years. It's going to happen this year now because he's with the Chargers. I'm with you on that. So we added another tight end. We already have a lot of young, good tight ends that we like. We have Cole Kmet, Pat Freiermuth. We also have Mike Gesicki, who's a little bit older. And then we add Everett. So now we're at 4, and we were going to, spoiler alert, be targeting Trey McBride as well, who, spoiler alert, we didn't end up drafting because now we have 4 tight ends. We didn't really need 5. But we moved back from 107 to 108 to pick up Everett. And now our tight end room is that much stronger. It's 4 of the in redraft. I think this is the group of mid-round tight ends to target, right? Maybe not Gesicki so much, but I think Freiermuth, Kmet, Everett are at different price points are really fun breakout tight end candidates for this year.
They are. And the thing that it allowed us to do, and we talk a lot about creating flexibility, we did really want Trey McBride, and we have him ranked in the guide. And I know that you're on board with this a lot earlier than his ADP, but also with his ADP, you're thinking, okay, well, we're going to risk it and get him later than we have ranked. But by adding the 4th tight end, it gives us a little bit of a hedge because now if you risk it and lose, you're like, well, we didn't really have space for him anyway. So that part of it, works out nicely for us. So we make this move back from the 107 to the 108 in order to take Sky Moore. And then we're like, but maybe with the number of wide receivers we already have, we need to do something a little bit different. We know it's going to be difficult to get 2023 first round picks because everybody is on that, right? And we have a pick here where there was a team that needed to move in to take a QB. And the ADP with Olave, Pickett, and Moore has Pickett in there with Olave, and Moore is after that. And so we're thinking, well, number one, it probably makes sense to get a 2023 R1 instead of Sky Moore because we have this roster slot crunch and because it's going to be so difficult to get. Number two, there's at least this outside chance that we could move back in somehow to get more less expensively than the move out would be. So we do move out. We give up the 108, the 307, and a 2023 round 2 and pick up the 304. So we move up a couple slots. We get that 2023 first, and then we get a 2023 second from a team that has just had terrible luck in the offseason. This team was put together well, and then they were hit by every possible thing that could have happened during the offseason to where now the team is just frankly not particularly good and through no fault of the manager. But by picking up that round 2, we probably move up in next year's second round. And so we get, a first, that could be anywhere. We get a second that's higher than the second that we trade away. We move a little bit in the third round, and Ben, we do lose Sky Moore, at least for the moment.
Yeah, it's funny because you said we were thinking about trading back in. I mean, I would describe it as one of our clear goals coming into this year with our roster crunch was to try to move some of this pick value into 2023. So this opportunity to pick up a 2023 first to move out of the 108 was, accomplish that goal. And as you said, we trade away our own second, so we think we're moving up in the second round as well. And that could be pretty huge. I mean, that was something that you suggested, and I was like, I don't necessarily always think that way, but if you have a pretty good feel that this could be anywhere from even if it's just the 209 to the 205, that's pretty nice in the second round of a rookie draft. But it could be, if we make the title game like you were suggesting earlier in the show, it could be the 211. And if this team's poor luck continues, it could be the 211 all the way up to the 202 or something, something in that range, which would be a pretty huge move up, when you're doing these rookie drafts. those high seconds can be really, really valuable. It seems every year those are very desirable picks. The late seconds are still interesting, but less so. It's always a pretty significant tier break somewhere in that second round, it feels like. So that was a really interesting element of it that you proposed that I was really excited about. So potentially turned a late second next year into 2 more premium picks for next year, an earlier second plus that first. And you mentioned a small move up in the third, but that was a really nice package to move out of one of our first round picks. And we had already gotten London. We had already gotten Wilson. But then after we did that, it was almost like we maybe hadn't really talked through it a ton, because it was almost like, well, now we're not going to be able to have Sky Moore.
That was the case. And so then we immediately start brainstorming. It's like, well, we could trade that 2023 first back and, just get him there. And what we'll have accomplished was that move up in the second, which, as you just said, would still be valuable. Then we're like, wait, no, we can't. I mean, it just would make no sense with having way too many picks in the first place. And we're trending towards having like 30 players, and you can only keep 20. Now, you can look at those extra 10 all through the offseason. The ones who break out, say if 5 of those 10 really gain value, those 5 you can move for things that matter, right? So it's not like you're going to cut 10 people, but we are in a roster crunch. So we're like, we can't give up that 2023 first. But what we did do was move back in the second. And so again, this is the value of having a lot of the picks, because you have flexibility. So we ended up trading the 112 for that 109 in order to do that, because there is a tier break that I think almost everyone in the community realizes and says, look, if you're going to move from essentially the 111, 112 range into the 109, 110 range, I mean, that 110 to 111 is the break. If it's not after more, I mean, it depends on how enthusiastic people are in your league about Christian Watson, but you're going to have to really pay. And we did, and we bit the bullet, and we paid the 202 and had to move all the way down to the 301.
So the 112 and 202, basically 2 turn picks to get back to the 109. The 301 is not worthless, but as we were talking through it, I was sort of describing it as Sky Moore or 2 really interesting players. And then we were like, well, with the roster crunch and everything else, and how high we have Sky Moore valued, I mean, we would argue that he belongs up in the Chris Olave tier, right? Wouldn't you? Then probably it's worth those 2 players, even if you maybe didn't have the 301. That would be a pretty aggressive move without getting at least the 301 back. But that was sort of, the way that I was thinking through it and saying to myself, yeah, I would take Sky Moore at that point with our roster crunch. This is a player we're really, really high on.
He is. And I kind of made the mistake of Googling him as we were going through these trade offers and reading more about how this guy should have been picked far earlier. I don't know. The Chiefs GM, Brett Veach, was bragging about how, I'm not bragging about, he's joking about how on like his draft bingo sheet, like moving down was the only thing left to check off. And like, that should be the number one thing you check off. You should be moving down. But he's like, so we finally pulled it off from the 50 to the 54, and we still got Sky Moore. And it's like, yeah, but there were multiple receivers picked in there. You could have, I mean, what did you gain in that move that was worth risking more? But they risked it. They won. Sky Moore is probably going to be ahead of at least Olave, if not, I don't know, Ben. I think he's going to move ahead of either one of Williams and Wilson and one of Burks and London. Maybe that last one is aggressive there. But anyway, we liked it. And what we lost, Rachaad White is picked at the 202. The 301 becomes Alec Pierce. We actually traded that pick for the 309 and the 405. Again, you're like, why are you guys trading back when you already have too many players? But there are some specific guys that we're targeting at those spots. We think that portion of it will potentially work out. And yeah, so to have been able to pick up a first, draft 3 times, get 3 guys we liked, I think this was our dream scenario going in.
Absolutely. I mean, so we leave the first round with Drake London, Garrett Wilson, Sky Moore. One of the things we talked about, running back being the weakness of our roster, is how do we want to approach that with this class? Because it has Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker at the top. A point you made either on a show or to me elsewhere, or maybe on one of our live streams, which most listeners, I hope, did not listen to all of those because we're very long for your own sanity, was this idea that maybe as a tiebreaker, it makes sense to take a Kenneth Walker in the early part because there are so many receivers we like. And we have to think about it holistically in terms of what we're going to get out of this rookie draft for our roster. Not necessarily what each player is, but what does our team look like after this rookie draft, or what does our total haul look like? We kind of threw all that out the window. I think that made a lot of sense, but instead we just took 3 receivers, which was sort of what we were always going to do, I guess. We ended up with London, Wilson, and Moore, and then we still had plenty of picks in the second round, and the 2 picks we managed to make in the second round were also wide receivers.
They were. And so just to fill it in, it did go Watson at 110. It went James Cook at the 111. And I mean, that feels like just such a gross pick, but I'm not criticizing here. Curtis Patrick and I picked Cook at the 111 in our Pros versus Joe's FFPC rookie draft. So there are situations in which, I mean, you almost have to end up with that as the pick there. The 112, and this is the pick we traded out of. So we're obviously looking at that to see, okay, well, what did we give up, or what, in a multiple universe, what do we lose there? And it's George Pickens. And obviously he would have been the guy we would have been going after if he had landed with the Chiefs instead. Still an interesting pick there with the Pittsburgh Steelers, especially if Kenny Pickett can get the job done. The 201 was Jahan Dotson, and that's not a pick that we're on, but it is a good value for the 16th overall pick in the draft, who was a wide receiver. Rashad White at the 202. Then, and Ben, we were a little bit disappointed about this because the weakness that we do have, and the thing that could throw a huge wrench in the works of trying to win the championship, is we just have 2 quarterbacks. And we thought that one of Willis, Corral, and Ritter would make it to us. They did not. They go 203, 204, 205. Damian Pierce goes at 206. Then we're back on the board at 207.
Yeah, so we wound up giving up Pickens and White for Moore, just to backtrack how that went. Or at least, other people took those players in those spots, but probably we would have as well. Those are 2 really good players, and that's interesting, right? We also got the 301, but I don't think we would have been upset necessarily to have the other 2. But yes, we got back on the clock at 207. We debated trading back. What are we going to do? But ultimately, because we had a few guys that we liked here, ultimately we decided we wanted David Bell enough to pull the trigger there. He's somebody that in some of our other leagues with analysts, we've seen go as high as 110, which that was today. That was, after we took that pick, and I ended up texting you saying it's pretty exciting to see him go that high with some of the other, like-minded people. That was also a single quarterback league, I should say. But he's viewed very favorably by some, certainly. And so to get him at 207, there's the athleticism concern that's never really thrown us off when a guy has a production profile like his.
Exactly. And I just keep going back to this Cleveland Browns situation where Amari Cooper is probably going to put up some good numbers this year because they don't have anybody else, but he is trending downward in a way that the Cowboys very clearly were done with him. They felt like he limited their team as they were making their playoff run last year. You can look at his peripherals in the RotoViz Player Explorer, and you can see how he's not the same guy in terms of fantasy points over expectation, run after the catch, all of these things that even a couple of years ago, at the beginning of his time in Dallas, he was still a star. He's not that now. David Bell, we're just going to go ahead and throw out Keenan Allen and Dream, right? You might as well in that situation where, depending on how things turn out, if you're willing to be patient, and there's probably a suspension in the offing, but however that works out, it does seem like Deshaun Watson will eventually be their quarterback, and then you have David Bell in that situation with him, and the sky really is the limit. This is a guy who is able to get open, makes extremely difficult catches look easy. Curtis and I picked Bell in the Pros versus Joes with Dotson still on the board. And so, that's really been, I think, the controversial pick this year is you have this first round wide receiver versus this late third round wide receiver, because of how big the gaps are in terms of under and overperforming draft slot with guys who, number one, have the early breakout and number two, have the early declare versus the guys who don't have those two things. And then when you throw the team situation in on top of it, both in terms of competition for targets and quarterback play, I don't know. I like this pick. And partly one of the things you can do too, when you have a lot of picks, is when you want to make a controversial selection for a guy that you just simply want to have on your roster, you can do it.
Yep. And the two other guys that we were considering here, we had the 207 as well as the 210, were Trey McBride to continue to add to our tight ends, and Isaiah Spiller, who did not test well, but lands in a really fantastic spot with the Chargers where he could probably fill that big back role that Joshua Kelly and Larry Roundtree have not been able to fill alongside Eckler. I think he has an opportunity to be sort of the goal line back in year one, plus with his receiving profile. Shawn, you sort of said if something happened the last we talked about this, if something happens to Eckler, he's kind of got to be that guy. I mean, we saw a weird name to bring up, but we saw Kalen Ballage sort of consolidate in it from the big back role, some of the passing work in this offense a couple of years ago for a very short period of time. Justin Jackson is still a free agent, if I'm not mistaken, so you don't have that clear backup for the pass catching role. If something were to happen to Eckler, I mean, Spiller does have quite a bit of upside, I think.
He's almost a low end RB1 if Eckler gets hurt, right? I mean, just from the situation, even if you don't believe in him, and I think there's reason to believe in it.
Right. And the Chargers don't believe in their other backs, I think was the biggest thing that we learned from last year, and how heavily they leaned on Eckler, how many touchdowns he wound up scoring, his usage near the goal line. That very well could carry over, and that's why he's a top pick in fantasy. But it does feel like this pick was to address that exact thing that was different about Eckler's usage in 2021, so that he doesn't have to take so much of the load. So then we were up at 210, and both of the guys in between 207 and 210 that we left on the board, we were hoping maybe one might get there, had gone. There's still a lot of other interesting names here. One that we really like, but we're hoping we could probably get at 212. And so with the 210, we traded out of that to get a 2023 second and a 2023 fifth. And so now we're continuing to add to this 2023 war chest. Now we have the extra first, we have the extra second, we've moved up in the second. I think we have some other extra picks already accumulated as well somewhere along the way. You would know this better than me, Shawn, but that pick wound up being Tyler Algier. Then John Mechie goes 211, and at 212, we were able to grab Wan'Dale Robinson, who was the other guy we were really interested in.
Exactly. And we have so many picks, and you're thinking, okay, well, we're going to take David Bell. We're going to do whatever it takes to move up into either the 208 or the 209 and get one of our two guys there. We only have to move up one slot. How much could it really cost? And the answer sometimes is just that it costs too much. And or the person, and it was one opponent who had both of those picks, and we messaged back and forth a little bit, and just in a very friendly way, he said, look, this is an orphan I'm taking over. I'm going to stick with these picks and make them. And you can definitely understand that. And so we did move out with the 210. That helps us with the roster crunch.